My ex-girlfriend called me to say, "You wouldn't care if your dog went missing, right?" No shit, I would care if my dog went missing. I wedged the phone between my shoulder and ear while placing cans of soup on the shelf. Yikes! You're gonna be super mad at me. I'll see you when I see you. Her voice had that fake cheerful tone she used when she was up to something. What did you do with my dog? But she'd already hung up. I thought she was rage baiting me, but something felt wrong. Ciara and I had dated for 3 years, and she'd always been jealous of how much I loved my golden retriever, Dante. She used to complain that I paid more attention to the dog than to her. Which was probably true near the end when she'd become increasingly controlling and mean. She'd once, accidentally, left the gate open, hoping he'd run away. Another time she'd tried to convince me he was too expensive to keep. The woman had serious issues with my dog. I practically ran to find my supervisor, Brad, who was counting inventory in the back. My hands were already shaking as I rounded the corner. "Can I take my break now?" "I think there's an emergency with my dog." Brad looked up from his clipboard with his permanently annoyed expression. He was one of those managers who acted like the grocery store was the Pentagon, and he was defending national security. "You think there's an emergency, or there is an emergency?" "There is an emergency!" I was already backing toward the door. "Oh, that's terrible. I really can't let you go, though. You have to work a minimum of 4 hours first." He went back to his counting like my world wasn't falling apart. Kiss my big red ass. I ripped off my name tag and threw it on the floor. I called my girlfriend Cassandra while speedwalking to my car. My fingers fumbled with the keys and I dropped them twice before managing to unlock the door. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey babe, what's up? Is Dante still at home?" I tried to keep the panic out of my voice. "Let me check." I heard her moving through our apartment. The sound of doors opening. Her calling Dante's name. Each second felt like an hour. "No, I don't see him anywhere. His leash is gone too." "Why?" My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I explained about Ciara's call while starting my car. The engine turned over 3 times before catching. Cassandra immediately started looking everywhere. Under beds, in closets, the backyard. But Dante was definitely gone. He was a 100-pound golden retriever who barked at butterflies. He couldn't just disappear. We called Ciara back together on speaker. She answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting. "Don't worry. I'll make sure you get some of the insurance payout." "Insurance payout? What are you talking about?" My hands were shaking so bad I had to pull over. "Well, Dante is insured for $5,000, right?" I remembered from when we were together. Such a valuable purebred. It would be terrible if something happened to him. She was enjoying this. I could hear the smile in her voice. "Ciara, where is my dog?" Cassandra grabbed the phone from me. "I have no idea what you mean. I'm just saying if he happened to get lost and never came back, at least you'd get money. Dogs run away all the time, especially when doors get left open." Ciara laughed and it sounded evil. The next 3 hours were torture. We drove to every place Dante had ever been. The dog park where he loved to chase tennis balls. The hiking trail where he'd roll in mud puddles. The pet store where the employees knew him by name and always gave him treats. Cassandra made missing dog posts on Facebook while I called every vet and shelter in a 20-mile radius. Golden retriever, 7 years old, answers to Dante. No, he's not microchipped. I repeated the same information over and over until my throat was raw. We even went to Ciara's apartment complex. I pounded on her door while Cassandra checked the parking lot. Her car was there, but she wouldn't answer. Her neighbor said he'd seen her loading something big into her car that morning, something that was moving under a blanket. Ciara called again as the sun was setting, the golden hour light that Dante loved to nap in. "You should get the payout in the mail in about 2 years. Thanks so much for your help. Make sure to cancel your Chewy subscription." 2 years? Ciara, what did you do? I was screaming now. She was laughing again. Cassandra grabbed the phone. "If you hurt that dog, I swear to God." But Ciara hung up. We drove home in defeated silence. Cassandra held my hand while I tried not to cry. Dante had been my best friend for 7 years. The thought of never seeing him again was unbearable, and knowing Ciara had done something horrible made it so much worse. When we pulled into our driveway, Cassandra gasped. There was a shape on our front lawn. My heart stopped. It was Dante, lying in the grass. When I ran to him, I found something absolutely disgusting. Chunks of raw meat were scattered around him, soaked in something that smelled sweet and chemical like car coolant. Dante's breathing was shallow, and there was white foam around his mouth. I screamed for Cassandra while dropping to my knees beside him. My hands shook as I tried to clear the foam from his airway. His eyes were half open but unfocused, and his whole body was limp. Cassandra came running out and saw what was happening. She pulled out her phone to call the emergency vet while I scooped Dante up in my arms. His 100 pounds should have been hard to lift, but adrenaline made him feel like nothing. I ran to the car with him while Cassandra gave our information to the vet clinic. She jumped in the driver's seat and peeled out of the driveway while I held Dante in the back seat. His breathing was getting worse, and I kept whispering that he was going to be okay, even though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The 15-minute drive to the emergency clinic felt like hours. Cassandra ran red lights while I tried to keep Dante's airway clear. When we screeched into the parking lot, a woman in scrubs was already waiting with a gurney. She introduced herself as Dr. Aida Navarro while helping me lift Dante onto the stretcher. She took one look at the foam and smelled his breath before wheeling him straight back. She explained it looked like antifreeze poisoning based on the sweet smell and symptoms. The timing matched up perfectly with when Ciara had taken him. She said we got here just in time because another hour could have been fatal. While they started emergency dialysis on Dante, I remembered the meat chunks on our lawn. I'd grabbed some in a plastic bag without thinking before we left. When Aida came back out to update us, I showed her the evidence. She examined it carefully and said this was definitely intentional poisoning. She offered to document everything with photos and written reports for a police case. The meat had been soaked in antifreeze to mask the taste with something sweet. Cassandra was going through my phone while we waited. She found all of Ciara's texts from today, especially the one about the insurance payout taking 2 years. She started screenshotting everything and making a timeline on her phone. Every call, every text, every voicemail from Ciara was documented with exact timestamps. The pattern was obvious when you looked at it all together. Ciara had called me right after poisoning Dante to taunt me while I searched for him. A vet tech came out with a clipboard full of forms about treatment costs. The emergency dialysis alone would be $3,000. The intensive care monitoring for the next 48 hours would be another $2,000. Additional treatments and medications could push it even higher. I signed everything without hesitation, because money didn't matter if it meant saving Dante's life. I tried calling the police from the waiting room, but the officer who answered wasn't helpful. He said without proof that Ciara actually did it, they couldn't do anything about suspicious meat on my lawn. Anyone could have thrown it there. He suggested I contact animal control in the morning since they handle poisoning cases more seriously than regular police. It was frustrating, but I wrote down the case number he gave me anyway. 4 hours passed before Ada came back out with an update. Dante was stable but critical. His kidneys had taken a hit from the antifreeze, but the dialysis was working. He'd need to stay for at least 48 hours of intensive treatment and monitoring. She showed us x-rays and blood work results that documented the extent of the poisoning. Cassandra and I drove home completely exhausted. The apartment felt wrong without Dante there. His toys were still scattered on the living room floor. His food bowl sat empty by the kitchen. Every corner reminded us that he should be here but wasn't. I couldn't sleep at all. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started documenting everything. Every interaction with Ciara over the past few months. Every threat she'd made about Dante. Every joke about getting rid of him. I found old texts where she'd complained about how much I spent on his food and vet bills. There were voicemails where she said I loved the dog more than her. The timeline showed clear escalation from complaints to threats to action. I organized everything into folders with dates and descriptions. Screenshots of texts went in one folder. Transcripts of voicemails went in another. I even found emails where she'd researched how much Dante's insurance was worth. At 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Ciara. She asked if I'd canceled the Chewy subscription yet since I wouldn't need it anymore. The cruelty of it made my hands shake with rage. I screenshot it immediately and added it to my evidence folder. She was still taunting me while my dog fought for his life in the emergency clinic. This wasn't just about jealousy anymore. This was pure evil. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts to find the number for Ciara's neighbor, who'd mentioned seeing her that morning. My fingers typed out a text asking if he'd be willing to give a formal statement about what he saw. He replied within minutes saying yes and that he'd taken a photo of her loading something into her car because it looked weird. Cassandra was already on her laptop looking up security camera apps we could install on our phones. She found one that would send alerts whenever it detected motion and started setting it up while I positioned her laptop to face our front yard through the window. If Ciara came back to do something else, we'd have video proof this time. The whole setup took about an hour with both of us testing different angles and making sure the night vision worked properly. I kept going back to what Ciara had said about 2 years for the insurance payout. That wasn't something you just know off the top of your head. She must have looked it up and planned this whole thing weeks or maybe months in advance. The thought of her sitting at her computer researching how to kill my dog and commit insurance fraud made me feel sick. Around 4 in the morning, I finally passed out on the couch from exhaustion. Cassandra woke me at 7 when someone knocked on our door. Nathan Gibbs from Animal Control stood there with a clipboard and evidence bags. He took my statement while carefully bagging the poisoned meat I'd saved from the lawn. He explained that antifreeze poisoning was a felony in our state, and they took these cases seriously. He photographed the area where I'd found Dante and took measurements of our yard. He said the prosecutor would want exact details about where everything was found. Nathan gave me his card and said he'd be in touch after the lab tested the meat. About an hour after he left, my phone rang with a call from the emergency vet. Ada's voice sounded tired but hopeful as she told me Dante had made it through the night. His kidney function was improving slowly, and he was starting to respond to the treatment. She was documenting everything in detail for the cruelty report that would go directly to the prosecutor's office. She'd taken photos of his condition when he arrived and kept detailed notes about his symptoms and treatment. The relief I felt was huge, but it didn't last long. Cassandra and I got into our first real fight about what to do next. She wanted to hire a lawyer immediately, but I thought we should trust the system since we had so much evidence. We went back and forth for an hour with both of us getting more frustrated. The stress of everything was getting to us, and we were both running on no sleep. We finally agreed to at least research legal aid options and see what was available. While Cassandra made calls to legal aid offices, I couldn't help checking Ciara's social media. What I saw made my blood boil. She'd posted photos at a bar last night, laughing and doing shots with friends, while my dog was fighting for his life in the emergency clinic. The timestamp showed she was out partying just hours after poisoning Dante. The comments from her friends were all about how much fun she was having and how great she looked. Nobody had any idea what she'd done just hours before. I screenshot everything and added it to our evidence folder. After lunch, we drove back to Ciara's apartment complex to look for security cameras. The apartment manager was actually helpful and said there was a camera covering the parking lot. He couldn't show us the footage without a police case number, but said he'd preserve it once we got one. We walked around the complex checking for other cameras and found 2 more that might have caught something. I wrote down their locations and which way they were pointing. My phone buzzed with a text from the neighbor including a photo attachment. He'd taken it yesterday morning at 6 a.m. when he was leaving for work. The photo clearly showed Ciara loading a plastic bag into her trunk. You could see her license plate perfectly, and what looked like a pet store logo on the bag. He said he'd thought it was weird because she didn't have any pets, and the bag looked heavy. This was exactly the kind of evidence we needed to prove she'd planned this. Cassandra immediately started calling pet stores in the area while I drove us home. She asked each one if they had security footage from yesterday, and if someone matching Ciara's description had bought anything. The first 2 stores said they didn't keep recordings for more than 24 hours. The third store said they kept footage for a week and would preserve it if the police requested it. The manager remembered a woman buying rat poison and antifreeze yesterday morning who paid cash. She said the woman had seemed nervous and kept looking around like she didn't want to be seen. Cassandra got the manager's name and direct number for the police to contact. I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and started typing up everything I could remember about Ciara and Dante from the past 3 months. The first incident was back in January when she joked at a party about how much money I'd save if Dante died. Then in February, she'd asked if I'd ever thought about rehoming him because he was getting old. There was that time in March when she'd left chocolate bars on the coffee table, even though she knew chocolate was toxic to dogs. Each incident seemed small by itself, but seeing them all typed out in order made my stomach turn. The pattern was so obvious now. She'd been testing boundaries and getting more bold each time. I added dates and times to everything I could remember and included screenshots of old texts where she'd complained about Dante. The document grew to 5 pages, and reading it made me realize how blind I'd been to the warning signs. My phone buzzed with a text from Brad saying I needed to return my uniform within 48 hours, or he'd dock my final paycheck. I typed back that he could keep the uniform as a reminder of how not to manage people, and blocked his number. The guy had literally told me my dog's emergency wasn't important enough to leave work. I added his text to my evidence folder, just in case we needed to show why I'd left work that day. Cassandra was making more calls when her phone rang, with an unknown number. A woman on the other end said she lived 2 streets over and had seen our missing dog posts online. She'd been walking her kids to the school yesterday morning around 7:30 when she saw someone throwing something over a fence into our yard. The person was wearing a dark hoodie so she couldn't see their face, but she remembered thinking it was weird because they threw the stuff and then ran back to their car really fast. She said the car was a white sedan, but she didn't get the license plate. We thanked her and got her contact info for the police report. Another witness who could place someone at our house right around the time Dante got poisoned. The pieces were all coming together. Ada called from the vet clinic with the official toxicology results. Dante's blood showed high levels of ethylene glycol, which was the main ingredient in antifreeze. She said the concentration levels indicated he'd ingested a significant amount within the past 12 hours. This was exactly what Nathan Gibbs had said we'd need for criminal charges. Ada emailed me the full report, with all the technical details, and said she'd already sent a copy to animal control. She also mentioned that in her 20 years as a vet, she'd seen maybe 5 intentional poisoning cases, and they almost always involved someone the owner knew. My phone rang again, and this time it was someone named Detective Jasmine Ruiz from the police department. She said she'd been assigned to our case after Nathan Gibbs escalated it based on the evidence we'd gathered. Her voice was serious and professional, as she explained that pet poisoning cases often escalated to other crimes like stalking or property damage. She wanted to meet with us tomorrow morning to go over everything we had. She also said to start documenting any contact from Ciara and to avoid confronting her directly. After I hung up, Cassandra and I sat down to figure out how to handle things going forward. We decided we needed strict rules to protect ourselves and build the strongest case possible. First rule was no posting about the case on social media, no matter how much we wanted to expose what Ciara had done. Second rule was all communication about the case would go through one dedicated email account, so we could keep everything organized. Third rule was one of us would always stay home in case Ciara showed up again. We couldn't risk leaving Dante alone, even for a few minutes once he came home from the hospital. We also installed a doorbell camera app on both our phones and set up Cassandra's laptop to record our front yard 24/7. The next morning, we met Detective Ruiz at the police station. She was younger than I expected, with short black hair and intense brown eyes that didn't miss anything. She reviewed all our evidence and took notes on everything. When she saw Ciara's text about the insurance payout and the 2 years comment, she shook her head and said those showed clear premeditation. She explained that we had enough for harassment charges already, but if we could get more witnesses or evidence of Ciara near our property, we could add stalking charges too. She gave us paperwork for a restraining order and said the process usually took about a week, but given the circumstances, they might be able to expedite it. She also gave us her direct number and said to call immediately if Ciara contacted us or showed up anywhere. After leaving the police station, we drove to the legal aid office Detective Ruiz had recommended. The lawyer who met with us was named Lucian Weber, and he specialized in stalking and harassment cases. He was tall and thin with glasses and spoke in a calm, reassuring way that made me feel like someone was finally taking this seriously. He reviewed everything and said Ciara's texts alone showed clear harassment and threats. The fact that she'd actually followed through on poisoning Dante made this a slam dunk case. He agreed to take our case pro bono since it involved animal cruelty, and said he'd file the restraining order paperwork that afternoon. He also warned us that Ciara might try to flip the narrative and claim we were harassing her, so we needed to be careful about any contact. That warning turned out to be exactly right, because when I got home and checked Facebook, Ciara had posted a long rant about how her ex-boyfriend was harassing her with false accusations about some dog. She claimed I was bitter about our breakup and making up stories to get attention. Several mutual friends had already commented asking what was going on and if I was okay. My first instinct was to respond with screenshots of all her texts, but I remembered what Lucian had said and closed Facebook instead. Cassandra helped me resist by taking my phone and hiding it for an hour. Within 10 minutes of Ciara's post going up, my phone started buzzing with texts from people we both knew asking for my side of the story. Later that evening, the neighbor who'd photographed Ciara called me in a panic. He said Ciara had shown up at his door 20 minutes ago, demanding that he delete any pictures he had of her. She was angry and kept saying something about how he had no right to spy on her. He'd been smart enough to start recording on his phone when he saw her through the peephole. In the recording, you could hear her clearly saying she didn't care about that damn dog and that he better delete those photos or she'd make his life hell, too. He said she'd finally left when he threatened to call the police, but now he was worried she'd come back. I told him to call Detective Ruiz immediately and send her the recording. The next morning, Cassandra and I went straight to the hardware store and spent $400 on new deadbolts, a doorbell camera that connected to our phones, and motion sensor lights for the front and back of the apartment. The guy at the store helped us pick out the best stuff after I explained someone was stalking us. He said the camera would record everything and send alerts to our phones if anyone came near the door. We spent the whole afternoon installing everything while checking over our shoulders every few minutes. My hands kept shaking while I drilled holes for the new locks. Cassandra held the ladder steady when I mounted the camera above the door. We tested everything 3 times to make sure it all worked right. The motion lights were so bright they lit up the whole yard like a football field. That first night, we barely slept, jumping at every notification from the camera app. It picked up every cat, every car driving by, every leaf blowing across the yard. Around 3 in the morning, the alert went off again, and I almost ignored it, thinking it was another false alarm. But when I checked my phone, there was someone in a black hoodie standing at our door. They had their hood up, but I could see their build and the way they stood. It was definitely Ciara. The motion light clicked on and she jumped back, then ran to a car parked down the street. I saved the video and sent it to Detective Ruiz right away. She called me back within an hour, even though it was the middle of the night. She said she'd add it to the case file and would try to get prints from our door handle in the morning. 2 days later, Detective Ruiz called with an update that made my stomach drop. She'd gotten partial prints from the plastic bag the poison meat was in, and they matched ones in the system from when Ciara had gotten a speeding ticket last year. Even better, she'd gotten the security footage from the pet store near Ciara's apartment. The video showed Ciara buying rat poison 2 days before Dante got sick. You could see her face clear as day at the register. Detective Ruiz said this was solid evidence for the prosecutor. That same afternoon, Cassandra and I had our worst fight since we'd been together. She wanted us to pack up and move to her parents' place in another state until this was over. I wanted to stay and fight. We screamed at each other for an hour about what was best. She said I was being stubborn and putting us in danger. I said running away would let Ciara win. We were both crying and saying things we didn't mean. Finally, we agreed that after this was all done, we'd go to couples counseling because the stress was tearing us apart, but we both wanted to stay together and deal with this head on. The next day, I decided to clean out the garage where I still had a box of stuff from when Ciara and I were together. I wanted it all gone. While going through old papers, I found something that made me sick. There were receipts from an auto parts store for antifreeze and from a garden center for rat poison. They were dated 3 weeks before she took Dante. She'd been planning this for at least a month, maybe longer. I took pictures of everything and sent them to Lucian. He called me back within minutes and explained something that finally made sense. The reason Ciara kept mentioning 2 years wasn't random. That's how long insurance fraud investigations usually take. She wasn't just trying to hurt Dante. She was trying to set me up to look like I killed my own dog for the insurance money. If I'd filed a claim after Dante disappeared, it would have looked suspicious as hell. Lucian said this showed even more premeditation, and the prosecutor would love this evidence. 3 days after the incident, I finally got to visit Dante at the emergency vet. When I walked into the room, he lifted his head, and his tail did this weak little wag. He looked so skinny and tired, but he was alive. Ada came in and explained he'd need special kidney food for the rest of his life, and medication twice a day for at least 6 months. The damage from the antifreeze was bad, but not permanent, since we got him there fast. She said he was lucky to be alive. I sat on the floor with him for 2 hours, just petting him and telling him he was a good boy. The next morning, Lucian came over to help us organize everything for the restraining order hearing. We spread everything out on the dining room table. All the text messages printed out, the photos from the neighbor, the vet reports, the police reports, witness statements from 3 different people. The stack of papers was almost 2 inches thick. Lucian went through everything piece by piece, putting it in order and making notes about what to present first. He said we had one of the strongest cases he'd ever seen. 5 days after the poisoning, Dante finally came home. He was weak and moved slow, but his tail wagged when he saw our apartment. He wouldn't leave my side for anything. When I went to the bathroom, he'd cry and scratch at the door. When I sat on the couch, he'd press against my legs. At night, he slept right next to the bed where he could see me. It was like he was scared I'd disappear if he looked away. That evening, Detective Ruiz called with the news we'd been waiting for. The prosecutor had reviewed everything and was filing charges for animal cruelty, stalking, and harassment. She said they'd probably offer Ciara a plea deal, but if she didn't take it, this would go to trial. Either way, Ciara was going to face real consequences for what she did. That same night, around 10 o'clock, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, a woman was crying on the other end saying she was Ciara's mom, and she just found out what her daughter had done to Dante. She kept saying sorry over and over and told me she wanted to pay all the vet bills, because she was so ashamed of what Ciara did, but I told her no thanks, and said if she wanted to help, she should get Ciara to cooperate with the police, and maybe get her into therapy or something. The woman cried harder and said Ciara had always been difficult, but she never thought she'd do something this cruel. And I just told her to have Ciara's lawyer contact mine if there was anything official to discuss, and then I hung up because I didn't want to deal with her family drama on top of everything else. The next few days dragged by while we waited for the restraining order hearing, and Dante slowly got better at home, eating his special kidney food and taking his pills twice a day while following me from room to room. The night before the hearing, I spread all our evidence across the kitchen table again, organizing everything into neat piles while Cassandra helped me practice what I'd say to the judge about why I needed protection from Ciara. We went through the timeline 3 times, making sure I remembered every detail about the poisoning and the harassment, and all her texts about the insurance money. Cassandra pretended to be the judge asking me questions, and I practiced keeping my answers short and clear without getting too emotional, even though my hands were shaking, just thinking about seeing Ciara in court. After we finished practicing, I sat on the couch with Dante's head in my lap, while Cassandra sat beside us watching some dumb reality show, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I actually felt like we might get through this okay. The hearing was scheduled for 9 in the morning, and we got there early with Lucian, who'd organized all our paperwork into a binder with tabs for easy reference. When Ciara walked in with her lawyer, she wouldn't even look at me, and just sat on the other side of the courtroom staring at her phone like this was some minor inconvenience in her day. The judge was an older woman who looked tired, but she carefully went through every piece of evidence we'd submitted, reading the texts out loud and looking at the photos of the poisoned meat and the vet reports about Dante's condition. After about 20 minutes of reviewing everything, she looked directly at Ciara and asked if she had anything to say, but Ciara just shrugged, and her lawyer said they weren't contesting the order. The judge granted a 2-year restraining order right there on the spot, saying Ciara couldn't come within 500 feet of me, Cassandra, or our home, and if she violated it, she'd be arrested immediately. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders, knowing Ciara legally had to stay away from us now. 2 weeks later, Lucian called to tell me the prosecutor had offered Ciara a plea deal for the criminal charges, which included animal cruelty, 2 years probation, mandatory counseling, and $5,000 in restitution to be paid over the next year. He said it was pretty fair for a first offense, and would keep her out of jail while still holding her accountable for what she did to Dante. I asked what would happen if she didn't take it, and he said, "We go to trial, which could take months, and might not result in anything better, so I told him I was fine with the deal as long as she had to admit what she did." A few days later, Lucian called again saying Ciara had accepted the plea deal, and as part of her sentence, she had to write a letter of apology to me, which made me laugh because what could she possibly say that would make this better? I told Lucian to handle all that stuff and just send me copies of the legal documents because I never wanted to read anything from Ciara or hear her voice again. That same afternoon, I got a text from someone I used to work with at the grocery store saying Brad had been demoted to stock clerk after losing 3 employees in 1 week because he kept treating everyone like garbage and refusing to let people leave for emergencies. It was petty, but I actually smiled for the first time in weeks thinking about Brad having to stock shelves instead of bossing everyone around with his clipboard. The final vet bill arrived a few days later, and the total with all the emergency treatment. And follow-up care came to $8,000, which made me feel sick until I remembered insurance would cover about $2,000, and Ciara's restitution would eventually cover another $5,000. When I told Cassandra about the bill her parents called that night and offered to help with the remaining amount, which totally surprised me, because they'd never really liked me that much, but they said anyone who'd quit their job to save their dog was good enough for their daughter. We started couples therapy the next week because even though we'd gotten through this together, it had put a lot of stress on our relationship, and we both had stuff to work through about the trauma and the fear and the anger. The therapist was this older guy who had 2 dogs himself and understood why this had been so hard on us, and he helped us talk about how scared we'd been and how we needed better ways to support each other during crisis situations. Over the next few weeks, I started getting messages from mutual friends asking why I'd blocked them on social media, and when I explained they'd defended Ciara or said I was overreacting about just a dog, they tried to backtrack and say they didn't mean it that way. But I was done with anyone who couldn't understand that Dante was family, and what Ciara did was attempted murder of a family member, so I kept them all blocked and felt good about cutting toxic people out of my life. The next morning, I took Dante straight to the vet to get him microchipped since I was never going through this again. The vet tech held him still while they inserted the tiny chip between his shoulder blades, and it only took seconds. I filled out all the registration paperwork right there in the office, and made sure my phone number was listed 3 different times. On the drive home, I stopped at the pet store and bought a GPS collar that connected to my phone so I could track him anywhere. The thing cost $200, but I didn't care because losing him again wasn't an option. I spent the rest of the afternoon registering Dante with every lost pet database I could find online. Pet Finder and Home Again and Finding Rover, and about 10 others that all wanted my credit card for premium memberships. Cassandra helped me take new photos of Dante from every angle, showing his distinctive golden coat and the white spot on his chest. We uploaded everything to each site and printed out flyers just in case we ever needed them. 3 days later, an envelope arrived from the court with Ciara's first restitution payment of $400. The check had her name on it, which made me sick, but at least it helped with the massive vet bills still coming in. I deposited it immediately and put the money straight toward Dante's ongoing medication costs. Every month for the next year, she'd have to send another payment until she'd paid the full $5,000 the judge ordered. Detective Ruiz called that afternoon to check in and said Ciara was showing up for her mandatory counseling sessions every week. She hadn't tried to contact me or come near our apartment, which was good since the restraining order was still active. The detective said Ciara's counselor reported she was participating in the sessions, though not exactly enthusiastic about being there. Our neighbor, Mrs. Sanchez, knocked on our door that evening with a casserole and said everyone on the street had heard what happened. She'd organized a neighborhood watch specifically to look out for any suspicious activity around our place. The guy across the street installed a camera that covered our driveway and gave me the login, so I could check at any time. Even the pet store owner where I used to buy Dante's food called to say he was donating a year's supply of the special prescription diet Dante needed now. People I barely knew were stepping up to help, and it made the whole thing slightly less awful. I started applying for jobs the next week since I'd burned that bridge with Brad at the grocery store. The manager at Pet Paradise called me back first, and during the interview I was honest about why I'd left my last job. He said anyone who'd quit to save their dog was exactly the kind of person he wanted working there. The pay was actually better than the grocery store, and he said I could bring Dante to work sometimes if I wanted. I started the following Monday and spent my first shift learning the register system while Dante slept under the counter. Customers loved seeing him there, and he got so many treats I had to start limiting them. My co-workers were all animal people who completely understood what I'd been through with Ciara. Cassandra and I kept going to therapy every Thursday evening to work through everything that had happened. Our therapist helped us figure out better ways to communicate when we were stressed instead of shutting down. We practiced actually talking about our fears instead of just hoping the other person would figure it out. After 6 weeks of sessions, we were doing so much better that we started planning a small camping trip for when Dante got medical clearance to travel. The second restitution check arrived right on schedule, and I used it to pay down more of the vet bills. Ciara's probation officer left me a voicemail saying she'd successfully transferred her supervision to another city 3 hours away. She'd gotten a job there and was starting fresh with new probation requirements, including continued counseling and community service. Knowing she was that far away made me sleep better for the first time in months. Detective Ruiz confirmed Ciara hadn't violated any terms of her probation and seemed to be following all the rules. More neighbors started checking in regularly, and the whole street basically adopted Dante as their unofficial mascot. Kids would ask to pet him on our walks, and their parents would slip me gift cards for the pet store. The weight that had been crushing my chest for weeks finally started to lift a little bit each day. One evening I sat with Dante in our backyard as the sun was setting in that perfect golden light he'd always loved. His breathing was steady and calm as he dozed with his head on my leg, just like he used to before any of this happened. The GPS collar blinked reassuringly, and I could feel the small bump of the microchip under his fur when I pet him. We'd survived something terrible that could have destroyed us, but somehow we'd made it through together, and that was the only thing that mattered. Well, that's a wrap on this one. Appreciate you letting me wonder about all this right alongside you. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.